healing is a very important aspect of Limbus company. Whether you're in a mirror dungeon, refraction railway, or even difficult story content, having healing is crucial to overcoming some of the challenges this game throws at you, especially with the new addition of unbreakable coins, basically forcing you to take damage no matter what. And that is why I'm here today, to give you an overview of every single healing ego in the game and looking at its current state after nearly 2 years into the game, looking at its absolutely soaring heights and its unfathomably skating lows. This video serves as a sort of guide to everything healing and sanity related, which newcomers can go ahead and use to get an educated opinion on what to shard or use, and honestly maybe the community at large, because the introduction of unbreakable coins has made it much more difficult to avoid damage in general. But also this video serves as a retrospective of all healing ego options available in the game, rather than just saying use Fluid Sac and be done with the video in 5 seconds. Because personally I am of the opinion that there are a lot of other great health and sanity healing egos, but because of Fluid Sac Faust being the absolute best, people refuse to seriously consider other options, and in some cases even just straight up ridicule them. Lifetime Stew Sinclair. And speaking of that ego, this video is also a little bit to rectify my absolute horrible takes in the video about Lifetime Stew Sinclair. Don't worry guys, I will prove that I in fact can do basic mathematics. But trust me, this video is aimed to be a genuine and serious analysis on literally every healing ego in the game and trying to put into perspective how bad Lifetime Stew Sinclair really is. Anyway, to get a good overview on the healing egos, I will use a sophisticated and in-depth analytical tool called a tier list. Like, no, I'm serious, a tier list is basically the best way to categorize them all from weakest to strongest. So I'm unironically using it. Not as in like the clickbaity kind of way, but just genuinely a good way to just categorize all the egos based on how strong they are. Before we get into the super exciting part of getting into the tier list and having all of our neurons in our brains activated by categorizing things, I think it's important to first of all say how I'm going to categorize them and what kind of ground rules we're gonna lay out. The ground rules are pretty simple. For an ego to qualify as a healing ego, it obviously, well, it has to heal. I don't think I need to tell you that much. This healing can either be health healing or sanity healing, because the game qualifies them both as healing. Secondly, we will be looking at this ego at their maximum possible potential, so up by 4 as it is right now. Thirdly, we will assume teams of 6 hitters. And lastly, we will assume that the average HP of identities is 208. This is the average of every identity since Barber Otis released. This is to simplify the math in this video and have a clear static number as the health, because reasonably you could say any ego is great when you're using an entire team of tanks in one single heater, like you're playing some horribly balanced hero shooter. Also, the way I'll be ranking these egos is pretty simple and goes as follows. The number one factor I will look at is their healing potential. This is the absolute max health or sanity healing that they can provide under optimal circumstances. This is, to be fair, and equal to all egos. However, not all egos are equal and do not do the exact same things. Some have higher costs or special status effects that come with them, and as such, after we take a look at their healing potential, we will then look at what other effects come with them. So let's say there's a hypothetical ego that we will put into A tier. If this ego has other good effects that are worthy of mentioning, like for example cheap cost or extra effects or really good buffs, I will bump them up a rank. So there could be a case where the ego that would objectively be ranked as A tier, I'll bump them up to S rank, because they have other effects that I deem pretty good mentioning. The same is true in reverse however. If there's an ego that is already bad and this effect just makes it worse to the point where it offends me on an emotional level, I will bump it down a tier. So yes, even a D tier ego can go lower if I deem it so absolutely disgusting that it deserves to be sent to the unknown abyss below. Oh yeah, also one last thing I forgot to mention is that there are a few egos that do technically heal sanity or health, but aren't included because they spend just as much sanity or health as they gain. And of course I want to say that before we get into it, that I try to be as serious and objective as possible with tracking them. However, when looking at other effects like damage potential, statuses it applies on allies, it will be based off of subjective feeling. And some people may value, for example, applying fragile to enemies more than applying protection to allies. But generally speaking, I try to look at all status effects and other things that come with it as objectively as possible. But you have to understand that there are so many status effects in the game that everyone views differently that I can't really apply value to them. But with that out of the way, let's take a look at the absolute creme de la creme of healing egos, and the one that has practically ruled Uncontested for 2 years now.
이 전투는 승리할 거야.
Fluid Sac Faust. Like I said in the video about Lifetime Stew Sinclair, she is meta for pretty obvious reasons. Like, what is there to say about her that isn't already obvious to the community? She can heal just an absolutely astonishing amount of sanity, and her healing is very great as well, with it being able to heal 186 health if we assume average health, which is frankly kind of nuts. I will mention some of the negative stats this eco has, which honestly admittedly is not that many, so it's not like it's gonna change the ranking of this eco. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone where this eco is going. But some of the flaws it has is that it's relatively reliant on heads rolls for its maximum potential. However, it is not that much you're missing out on because 15 sanity healed is still quite a lot. Another flaw it has is that the cost is a little bit above average, and the eco resources it uses up is very often contested between other healing ecos, mainly Gloom and Lust. This also serves as a good time to explain about sin resources that many healing egos fight over, and Gloom and Lust happen to be very heavily contested, with 17 out of the 29 egos will be covering fighting over Lust, and 12 fighting over Gloom. Now, Envy is relatively uncontested compared to these, with only 11 fighting over it, but admittedly 2 of those are the Soda egos, so it might as well be 9, honestly. Trust me, you'll see why they are so horrible when we get to them, because oh my god, their mere existence upon this earth is a goddamn disgrace. Anyway, well, it doesn't bump her down because she is just that good. I do think it's important to mention. And I'll be looking at what exact ego resources other egos cost, because I think it's an important factor to look at. Because for a lot of healing egos, you will see a dwindle specifically costing either Lust, Gloom, or Pride. And so naturally, those resources will be used up a lot. And typically, if you use too much of one sin resource, you will miss out on not only that one healing ego you've been relying on, but you'll also be missing out on other potentially good healing egos because of that competition. While egos that, for example, cost Wrath, Gluttony, Sloth, or Envy, will naturally have a much more ease of use than other egos because they don't fight over eco resources that much. Anyway, to not be a fully negative Nancy, she does redeem the small shortcomings by a really great passive that is straight up grants 2 protection to her ally, which is just straight up good. I don't know what to say about it. And admittedly, I did want to start with Fluid Sac Faust to establish a barber setting for S tier, because well, she isn't going anywhere other than S tier because of her absolutely great baseline sanity and health healing capabilities, so S tier she goes. Though, if you recall what I said in the first 20 seconds of the video, we will be looking at both the soaring heights of healing egos, but also the abysmal, horrible low points. And that is why we have to look at, well, him.
변신 완료?
It is only fair that after we talk about the literal best there is, that we go sightseeing in the literal garbage disposal field. And Soda Honglu is said garbage disposal field, because wow, he is horrible. Though, to be honest, I'm starting with him second to set a bar for the absolute worst of the worst, just so that we can have a good understanding of what are good numbers and what are bad numbers. And speaking of numbers, wow, Soda Honglu has some horrible numbers. The worst thing about these numbers is that they aren't percentage based, like literally every single other healing ego. The fact it is a percentage based means that this ego, even though it's horrible, will age like literal milk, because as the health of identities increase, the amount by which Soda Honglu heals will not increase. Not only that, you also have to straight up gamble gaining health or sanity from this ego, so throw any kind of consistency out of the window. Not only that, its passive is absurdly useless. Although an argument could be made for that this passive can be good in chain battles where there's usually no next wave, but overall this ego is questionable in terms of usage. Though I am willing to give it one actual positive, the eco resource cost isn't too bad, and it's not too heavily competing with other healing egos. So a case can technically be made for including this ego because it doesn't compete with super important resources too much other than Gloom, but to be fair, it only needs 2 of them. In the comments of the previous voice video, I was jokingly saying that I would defend Soda Honglu if the video did well, but honestly, this is about the best I can say about this ego, unless Uptime 5 magically saves it from the deep despairing depths of D tier, because that is exactly where this ego is going, the absolute bottom. And now that we've laid out which is the worst egos and which is the best egos, a natural question may arise. Why am I even doing this in the first place? What need is there to establish anything in the middle when you can simply spam Fluid Sac Faust over and over again when any kind of minor inconvenience happens? And really, it's because I want the community to notice other good viable options more. Because trust me, there are some really good egos out there that match close to the glory of Fluid Sac Faust, which just don't get talked about at all. And since this community loves analyzing stuff like this, I thought it would be an interesting topic to discuss. But also, speaking of the community and their interests, most of us share one other big interest other than analyzing egos and other content. That being Library of Runa, right? Well, Library of Runa also happens to be a shared interest of today's sponsor, Snowfall. Snowfall is a deck builder roguelike that takes heavy inspiration from Project Moon and wears it proudly on their sleeves. I mean, take a look at the footage, it is practically oozing Library of Runa inspiration at the seams. And that's exactly why I'm happy to have them as my first sponsor ever. Much like Library of Runa, Snowfall is a card battler set in a world where fighting is practically the norm. However, the game sets itself apart by being much more focused on item and card synergies along with faster paced turns and roguelike elements, such as random enemies that are both from the story mode and exclusive to the roguelike game mode. So, if you've ever wanted a fix of both Library of Runa combat mechanics mixed with roguelike mechanics, I think this is definitely a game you'll end up enjoying. As it stands right now, the game is set to release in August with one chapter alongside its roguelike game mode, with more chapters to come later. So, I would highly recommend wishlisting the game on Steam and getting it once it comes out, which you can do by following the link down in the comments below or in the video description. So yeah, check it out, and thank you to the developer Flower Basket for being my first ever sponsor. Cause as someone who really loves the community I live in, I'm happy my first sponsor can be with a BM inspired passion project like this. And with that being said, let's get back into the video. Anyway, now that we've established the bottom and the top, we can move on to everything else that is in between those two. And we'll be going by the number of the sinner. So the first one we will actually properly take a look at is Sunshower Yi Sang. Sunshower Yi Sang is an eco that most of the community views favorably for the frankly huge amount of damage it can allow you to do, especially so in slot resonance teams. However, I think an often overlooked part of him is the passive. Ray of Sun after Rain is a pretty underappreciated ego passive, granting pretty good passive sanity gain that requires you to basically do nothing but just play the game. 3 sanity may not be much, however, a way you can look at this is 18 sanity healing per turn, which going by numbers is just a straight up nice amount of sanity to get. And sanity as a mechanic snowballs, because more sanity leads to more head rolls, which leads to more cash wins, which then leads to more sanity. So even just having a small advantage like 3 sanity per turn can be a great advantage honestly. This can be especially good advice that you know will take very long to complete. However, I think it's better to view it as a cherry on top, because the main attraction is the amount of buffs it applies. Protection is a somewhat rare challenge to come across, but 3 is astonishingly rare. And good. If you ever want to use Sunshower Yi Sang in a supportive manner, you should always use it when you're about to take a lot of damage to the entire team, or if you want to set up some slot skills for later. Although it can also be used as a great damage leader, thanks to its 7 attack rate and 32 heads roll. Especially because its slot damage boost is before the attack even happens, so naturally it just deals 20% more damage. Although admittedly looking at damage numbers is not a priority while looking at healing egos, for obvious reasons. As for its negatives, it simply costs a lot to use, being one of the more expensive egos in the game and costing 10 in total. Another negative is that when you use it, you're gambling for a heads hit, because if you don't, well, the sanity of your Yi Sang goes completely down the drain. So it has a little bit of unreliability to it. Overall, when looking at the numbers, it is a self-sustaining sanity healing ego that doesn't provide that much for the rest of the team in terms of healing. So I would give it a C because of the numbers, however, because of the great buffs it applies and the sheer damage of this ego, it will be bumped up to a comfortable B tier. Up next on the block we have Faust base ego. I don't think there's much to explain about this ego because everyone probably is very familiar with it by just the metric of it being a base ego. Though for base ego, it has pretty great sanity healing. This ego is very great for when you're getting your battle and sin resources just started, especially because it is very cheap, costing only 6 sin resources. Although it does fight for a heavy amount of pride, which is heavily contested among the sin resource community. Although not only does the sanity healing end with its attack, it can also provide SP healing efficiency to others. Unfortunately, it does roll a little bit low, especially considering it has -3 offense level, which basically hinders it by -1 clash power. Though when you do hit, it has a nifty 3 attack rate at a cheap cost. Overall, representation in Midder is just very unreliable. And although I don't think its positives are enough to bump it up a rank, it will however get a sweet little spot in B tier. And even though we talk about the base ego, that is not where the talk about base ego stops. Because up next we have La Sangre de Sancho, and because it is yet another base ego, we will yet again not spend a lot of time on it, because a lot of people should be familiar with it. But its source of healing is from the healing from damage and hitting targets who have bleed on them. And because we can't exactly quantify healing from damage done, this ranking will have to go more based on feelings rather than concrete numbers, because there are a lot of things that can get in the way of damage calculations, like resistances, offense level, fragile, protection, etc, etc. Although one thing we can quantify is its astonishing passive. The passive practically allows Don Quixote to be really hard to kill, granted you have some sort of bleed application. If you do, you can very easily keep Don Quixote at high health for the entire fight, because she will basically be healing 3 HP on every hit, which, by the way, is completely unrestricted. This passive is really good, especially in Don Quixote's Canto, where pretty much every enemy under the goddamn sun has bleed. While it doesn't do much for the team, it does allow Don Quixote to have a lot more effective health, granted that there is bleed. Not only that, it's also pretty cheap, so it can be used as a cheap solution to a really high roll. Solid C tier. Up next, we have the current big Battle Pass ego, your name Mircalla Don Quixote. She is admittedly lacking in the healing department, but she's still here because she has a form of healing. And honestly, it may be especially obvious with this ego, but some of these egos are more so meant for the offensive capabilities rather than the healing capabilities. And this is a pretty clear-cut to my example of one of those, because healing isn't, well, it isn't great. I will give credit where credit is due, however, because this passive is really great for sustaining sanity and combined with Don Quixote's base ego, she can basically have both health and sanity sustenance, practically requiring no management from other healing egos. However, it does take a bit to come online. Mainly because of the fact that this ego drains 10 sanity every turn for 3 turns. So at best you don't lose any sanity, at worst you lose 10 sanity per turn. Though this isn't where the healing ends, because your name Mircalla Don Quixote has a corrosion that actually heals health as opposed to sanity. And before I get into talking about it, can I just say that this corrosion looks absolutely sick as hell. Like legitimately, and honestly talking about the corrosion is just an excuse to yap about how sick the art looks, because oh my god, the healing on it is pretty terrible. The healing on your name Mircalla Don Quixote's corrosion is pretty bad. Not only does it just straight up deal bleed damage to you, which could potentially just put you on 1 HP if you already have bleed to begin with, its healing is absolutely ridiculously limited. At best, and I mean the absolute best, you are getting 70 health out of it. Yes, that is what, 70 health. I have no clue why this godforsaken cap exists, but Portic would absolutely shot this ego in the leg by capping it. Literally kneecapping it if you got that will. So at best you're getting 50 healing out of it, which at that point, bro, just use any other healing ego if you really need health. Especially because if you intentionally overclock this ego, you will probably get a literal eviction notice next turn, because this ego literally bankrupts you by spending 18 sin resources. I'm sorry, let me make it clear. It spends 18 sin resources. If you absolutely need healing, literally use anything else. And that is why your name Mircalla Don Quixote is terrible for healing, and you're better off using anything else if you really need it that desperately. Because I'm not gonna lie, even Soda Holu can give you better healing for those amount of resources. Let's be fucking real here. However, I will give it praise for having an absolutely insane amount of damage and really good bleed support, along with a unique sound effect for bleed, which is a nice little cherry on top. Overall, if we were to talk about sheer numbers alone, I will give this ego a C tier. However, because of its great damage potential and the combo it can pull off with her base ego, it will be bumped up to a B tier. Okay, so up next we have... Oh no, oh dear god, no. Okay, so up next we have Eyes Ryoshu, and I'll keep it very simple. Okay, so I think the ranking for this one is pretty obvious, but I'll talk about it regardless. There is only one source of healing from this ego, and it is from an on-kill effect, which is already difficult enough to trigger, and it only has 3 sanity gain for all allies. Look, I know I gave Sunshower Yi Sang praise for 3 sanity healing for its passive, however this is just bad. This is honestly just like that one meme about a woman calling HR. They do the exact same number, but one is far worse than the other. Like, no, I'm serious, I would honestly call Porticmood's HR over this if I knew their goddamn phone number. And okay, I'm willing to give it some slack because it is very cheap and every gluttony does not have a lot of competition. And yes, it also has 2 attack rates, so at best you can get 32 sanity if the goddamn stars align and you manage to get 2 kills with this horrendous ego. However, you also have to consider you're sacrificing force for for the flames for this. So you're losing out on a lot by running Eyes Ryoshu. Yes, it can be good if you happen to have an enemy on low health. 3 sanity and some eco resources is a nice bonus. And no, I will not make an argument of, oh, if she happens to get 2 kills, she will get 6 eco resources, which is her exact cost. And so she spends 6 eco resources, but also gets 6 eco resources back. And so that makes her an infinite sanity generator. But I won't, because it will be a generally delusional argument to make, and for this video I'm being serious unlike the previous one. And no, I will not make a case for infinite damage in this video. This ego is going right next to her brother, all the way to D tier. If you want a good classer, just use your base ego. If you want sanity, use any of the other sanity healing egos I will talk about later. And if you want the ego resources, just fucking use Lifetime Stew Sinclair at that point. Anyway, now we'll talk about an ego with an actually good on kill effect. Red Eyes Open Ryoshu. Yes, I just absolutely trash talked an ego that needs to get a kill to be good. But this one is actually good because it doesn't solely rely on getting a kill, but also staggers. Not only that, it just does more damage in general. Red Eyes Ryoshu does have a condition to do more damage if the enemy has bind, which is a nice little add-on. And it just gets worse for Soda because not only does it just outperform Soda in terms of damage, it also does in terms of healing. Now obviously it doesn't heal sanity, however this ego under its optimal conditions can heal 60% of max HP with 30% of it going to herself and the rest of her allies. Which I don't think you need me to tell you this, but this is a lot better than 32 sanity healing done if the planets align. Also another great positive is that this ego benefits from other healing egos because it gains a 1 attack power up if it heals over 10% of Ryoshu's max HP. And lastly, the biggest positive of this ego is that this is one of the best healing egos if we're talking about the Sin resources it competes over. Not only is Wrath and Envy not very competitive, but also the combination of Wrath, Lust and Envy is something you will see very often in identities, especially Ryoshu's. Identities that tend to have one of these affinities will always tend to have another one of them from the list, or even all 3 in some cases, so this ego is ridiculously easily fueled. Relying on the kill and stagger effect does limit the usability of this ego by quite a lot, and so while I will give it an A tier for its amazing healing, it will have to go down to a high tier B spot. It is by no means bad, it is just difficult to fulfill sometimes, so I'll say it whenever you can, but don't overly rely on it. Up next we got Pursuance Meursault, a classic that has pretty much held up since the start of the game. And he has still held up for pretty good reasons, being able to heal a very solid amount of healing, and having a very nice assortment of Sin resources it needs. It made the Gregor slot, which is very uncompetitive, and although a lot of egos do need Pride and Gloom, he only requires a little bit of it, so I don't think it really brings him down too much. And on top of healing, he also grants some nice buffs. Protection, which it applies to the allies it healed, and offense and defense level up from its passive every turn thereafter. And also a random tremor burst for some ungodly reason? Why does it have this exactly? What? I mean, I'm not complaining, just confused. But if I generally had to name a downside of this ego, it's that it doesn't heal itself. Yes, for some reason, Meursault is not an eligible target to receive healing. This is because this ego says other allies rather than just allies. You see, Limbus Company actually has this weird little mechanical difference between when it says something affects allies and other allies. On a quick glance, the average person would think nothing of the differences between when the skill clarifies allies and other allies, but it does actually matter a lot. This unassuming slight change of wording dictates whether an ego or identity can affect itself. For example, Pursuance Meursault has other allies in its explanation, which makes it so that it can only affect other allies and not itself. Whereas, for example, Lifetime Sinclair, who just heals allies, does in fact heal himself. So now whenever you see the words other allies and ally, you'll know that, well, it's two entirely different things. Though, despite all of these, weighing its negatives and the positives, I don't think it's enough to bump it up a rank. And so, Pursuance Meursault will get a really well-deserved spot on high A tier. Overall, it's just a pretty good ego to use whenever you need some quick healing, but it doesn't do much of anything other than just fulfilling its role very well. Now, before we get to the next ego, I just want to quickly say that if you've been enjoying the video so far, I would really appreciate it if you consider liking and subscribing. Especially because this is my longest video yet and a lot of effort went into making this. And also, because it is my longest video, I want to celebrate this occasion by officially enabling channel memberships. That's right, by the time this video is up, channel memberships are up and you can support me to make even more better videos in the future. I plan to invest into a new computer so I can livestream new Kanto and Intervallo releases alongside with a livestream series where I plan to play Logic Wood's first game, Lobotomy Corporation, for the first time. But also so I can make even more long form videos in the future. So if you really enjoy my content and want to support me even further, you can do that now. It will be super appreciated, it will mean so much to me. But with that being said, let's actually move on to the next ego. Up next we have regarding Mircalla Ishmael, who is a similar case to regarding Mircalla Quixote. He really doesn't do much in terms of healing, with it all mainly coming from its passive, which is just La Sangre de Sancho but slightly worse. Admittedly, it is more applicable than La Sangre de Sancho when counting bleed damage taken by anyone, but just 10 health heal per turn is incredibly disappointing. And just like Don's ego, this is an ego you use for damage and not healing, but I have to cover it because it has healing. Like, I will go over this very quickly because it's literally the same story as regarding Mircalla Quixote. It does good damage, has a passive that's shoehorned in to do some sort of healing because it's a WAF ego. It also has what is practically bleed deluge and it costs a lot. So I can't really say much more than what I've already said. And besides, this video has already gone on long enough. It goes into C tier because 10 health healed per turn is less valuable than 10 sanity healed per turn. By merit, that sanity goes up to 45, and health typically goes away over 230 for Meursault. 10 health is literally like applying a small band-aid to him. So C tier, moving on. Up next we have the ego we will also not be talking about a lot, Land of Illusion. It's because it's a base ego, most people should be familiar with how he works. Anyway, to narrow down what makes this ego pretty good, is that it's a pretty easily spammable AoE ego that practically twins no sanity.
환상의 세계로 들어가 보죠.
Because it spends 15 sanity and gains 15 after the attack. And whilst Gloom and Lust is heavily competed over, it does however have the benefit of being almost mono Gloom, so with the Gloom Resonance team this can be very easily fueled and allow for very easy AoE spamming. Also, unlike the other self-centered healing egos, it does give the others -2 SP loss efficiency so they lose less sanity. Like most of self-centered healing egos, it will go into C tier. Though I may or may not make a video on this ego along with other mono-fueled egos one day. And I think how spammable this ego is thanks to its sanity healing is pretty good. And oh no, if you think we're done talking about self-centered healing egos, you are very wrong. Because thankfully we get to skip over Soda Hongnu and go directly to ADD Heathcliff. And we have probably one of the worst self-centered healing egos out of them all. Because while he is just kind of mediocre, the healing from this ego comes exclusively from its passive. That basically heals Heathcliff when he gets hit if he is charged, and if he's below 40% HP he gets charged for free 10 times. Now, this may seem good on paper, but when you actually get down to the details, this ego is quite bad for healing. Not only do you need to get hit and take damage to heal, the healing is ridiculously low. Sure, it prevents your Heathcliff from getting staggered, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter that much. Sure, this can, under optimal circumstances, restore 25% of max HP per turn. However, the problem is that it comes in small little batches of 2.5%. This is a problem because of the way Limbus Company calculates things. Because Limbus Company likes to always round down. So what will be theoretically 50 HP will realistically be 15 to 20 HP because that 2.5% keeps getting rounded down to a 1 or 2 healing. Now yes, while even 15 to 20 HP of healing per turn under optimal circumstances is better than Soda Hongnu's max 38 HP healing, the fact that it requires you to get hit in the first place to activate it makes it one of the few egos that will actually be put into D tier alongside the Soda siblings. Sure, it is Gloom Fragility, but just use this ego as a clasher. If you have to rely on this ego for its healing capabilities, let's face it, your team is probably already losing. Now let's get on to an actually good healing ego.
하나, 둘.
First of all, no, I'm not calling him by his full title because it is absolutely impossible to pronounce. And second of all, yeah, he's pretty good. There are honestly very little flaws to mention with this ego, and I'm surprised not a lot of people are talking about him, because he is an incredibly good sanity healing ego. Because at the cost of 8 sin resources, you get a frankly insane amount of benefits and sanity healing. And this ego should get more praise from the community. because on top of healing a massive amount of sanity, he applies 2 attack power down, has a good passive that heals and increases max health, and also basically has 5 attack weight. Because let's be real, whether you're ever going to use this ego below 15 sanity. Like honestly, all this together, I'll say it's basically as good as Fluid Sac Faust. Obviously not better, but it is up there. And honestly, there isn't a lot of bad things to say about this ego, so it will be the first ego other than Fluid Sac Faust that I will put all the way up in S tier. When I made this video, I've come to understand that a lot of the egos are like genuinely really underappreciated, and I think this is a good case of one that is just not given enough praise by the community. And because of those kind of egos, honestly it's a big part of the reason why I was so dedicated to making this video in the first place, because I want more people to talk about egos like Yasunyata Heathcliff that are good, but are just overshadowed because of the mere existence of Fluid Sac Faust. And so I want to raise awareness about the egos like this that rival up to the power of Fluid Sac Faust, but just doesn't get mentioned. Up next we have Ishmael, who honestly also doesn't get talked about too often despite having some really good options for healing. She has 3 in total, those being Bygone Days, Blind Obsession and Wingbeat. I'm beginning with Wingbeat because it's the lowest rank, but also because it's the worst of the 3. That's not to say it's bad by any means, it's just not as good as the other 2. The way that Wingbeat heals is unique to itself and is one of a kind. Basically, she will always prioritize healing herself, and if she is at max health, the healing that would otherwise be wasted will instead go to the ally with the lowest HP percentage. Though what is fascinating about this ego is that this ego really relies on luck because of its reroll mechanics. Basically, whenever she rolls heads on her second coin, she will reuse it up to 5 times. And this makes it honestly really difficult to place this ego on any kind of concrete ranking, especially because for some ungodly reason it makes its healing percentage done by 20% of max health, and healing from healing 8 to 12% of damage dealt from the second coin onwards, so this assessment will really be based off of gut feeling and intuition. And it also provides a bit of inconsistency because at best you can roll 7 coins and heal the same amount of health, and at worst you can heal just 20% of max health and a little bit extra. And honestly, there are a lot of RG factors in this ego which makes it honestly kind of weird. Like for some reason this ego has a lot of luck involved in pretty much everything. Even its passive, which is really good by the way. The passive is very simple, basically giving health 7 times per turn if she isn't at max HP. And honestly this makes her self-sustain pretty solid. And last point to mention, the ego requires mostly gluttony resources, which is very uncontested, so that is very nice. Overall, this ego is very consistent, however it does have good self-sustenance and does do more than the other self-sustaining egos we've talked about, so I'm feeling this ego will be a solid B tier. Up next, we got another sanity healing ego in the form of Blind Obsession Ishmael. Blind Obsession heals for allies for a pretty substantial amount of sanity. And while it is a bit more expensive than Yasunyata Heathcliff, who heals the same amount, it does have a bit more effects than that ego. This ego with its effects manages to support 2 archetypes very well, those being Charge and Poise, with her basically being able to get max charge in 1 use and 14 poise count under optimal conditions. Additionally, it also allows your identities to do just a hell of a lot more damage, with pierce damage being especially buffed. However, it is an after attack effect, so you need to rely on the spell going first to gain the full benefits of it. And the buff's not that there, because every turn thereafter she gives 1 ally 3 offense level up and 1 haste, which basically equates to 10% extra damage and 1 clash power up, if I'm correct. However, you can correct me in the comments about that if I'm wrong. Honestly, offense level up calculations are really wacky and weird. And also, this is one of the very few instances where the corrosion form also has healing effects. Although you don't want to use it because corroding the corrosion is super expensive and the healing is very underwhelming. At best the corrosion will heal 21% of her own max health, which is, well, for its cost is pretty bad. But hey, it's something. And honestly, despite the corrosion being pretty underwhelming, its awakening form is really good. And while it is really expensive, the assortment of really good effects balances it out. And I will give it an A tier for just healing 100 sanity. However, I think the benefits it provides are good enough to warrant an S tier, much like Yasunyata Heathcliff. I can honestly understand why this ego slept on so much despite being similar to Yasunyata Heathcliff, because admittedly it is very expensive. However, an ego that I do think is incredibly slept on as a healing option is...
주인께서 명하셨습니다.
Bygone Days Ishmael is a healing ego I have seen not a lot of people talk about, even though for healing it's a pretty good option. Even though it has somewhat high requirement conditionals, it does do a very fine job if it is able to pull them off. There are a lot of words here, but to simplify it all, by Conde's Ishmael will at worst heal 2 allies for 10% of max HP. However, if you have at least a total sum of 30 sinking on the target, and for Gloom Resonance, you can heal up to 30% for 2 allies, which equates to about a total of 120 healing done. Not only that, it comes at a relatively cheap cost and can also heal sanity with the help of its passive. Though its sanity healing is relatively small, locked behind a conditional that can only be fulfilled once per turn. However, it's still pretty noteworthy. Another pro of this ego is that it has 2 special status effects in the form of Curse and the Uninvited, which debuffs the enemy and makes them take more damage, and sanity heals your allies if the enemy dies. And no, I was actually lying because it inflicts a mana Wi-Fi in its corrosion, which actually isn't too bad to use because baseline this is a pretty cheap ego to begin with. But basically what the corrosion does is make the minimum healing much higher, increasing it to 10% of max HP healed to 3 targets. And even though the reward for fulfilling the sinking conditional is less, it is more achievable, requiring only a total sum of 15 sinking on the target. And also, if there is Gloom Resonance of 4 or higher, it heals 1 additional target and 5% extra health, and basically equating to about 160 healing done, considering you're healing 4 targets for 20% of max HP. This is very surprising because so far the trend for corrosions for these egos have been that they're either far worse or don't heal anything. Hence why I haven't been talking about them very often. But this corrosion, what it basically allows you to do is have quantity over quality healing. You are given a choice between basically whether you want to heal a lot of HP for 2 allies or quite a moderate amount of HP for 4 allies. And honestly, I wish more egos were designed like this. This is generally a really nicely designed ego, and unfortunately it is one of a kind that gives you a sort of choice between what kind of healing you're looking for. And I'm gonna be real here, writing this video and researching this ego made me really appreciate this ego. This is another one of those egos that motivated me to make this video because I wanted more people talking about it, because it's just straight up a really good and well designed ego. And technically speaking, the sinking conditional isn't even that difficult to fulfill, because Ishmael can do it all by herself with the help of Molar of his Ishmael skill 3. And so, because this ego does good healing, has 3 different unique status effects, has actually usable corrosion, and also gloom fragility, which I forgot to mention, I will be giving this ego a well-earned spot in S tier, next to her Blind Obsession ego. Because I really wasn't kidding when I said Ishmael has a lot of good healing options that are low-key slept on. All these 3 egos I talked about are pretty good in their own respective right, and I'd love to see the community talk more about them, but I digress. And up next we have another rather interesting choice, but this time not between Awakening and Corrosion, but between 2 egos. Those 2 being Hex Nail Outis and Pursuance Meursault. Honestly, I was groaning when Project Moon released another healing ego. In fact, I was pretty much annoyed because 2 of the 3 egos have healing just shoehorned in there, and so I had to waste time by explaining them in an already incredibly long video. But Hex Nail Outis was a genuinely pleasant surprise to me. Pursuance and Hex Nail is another case of whether you prefer quantity over quality, with Pursuance being the quality option and Hex Nail being the quantity option. Pursuance, much like Pursuance Meursault, heals 60%, but not of the target's max HP, but her own max HP, which for Rodion is a great thing to have because more often than not, Rodion identities tend to have more HP than the average amount. And so if you want, you can manipulate this amount by purposely using a really high health identity like the Rodia. Same goes for Hex Nail, which I'll talk about in a bit, but back to Pursuance. Pursuance is also really nice because it gives shield to the target allies, which I think is better than protection because it prevents damage rather than reduces damage like Meursault's Pursuance. And also it has relatively low cost and costs mainly slot, which is very uncontested. And also, the passive is a nice little cherry on top. Meanwhile, Hex Nail is also a really good option. Hex Nail has a few more conditionals, so it's more difficult to use than an eco that straight up heals 2 other allies, but at worst it heals 2 allies and herself for 50% of her own max HP, and at best it will heal 25% for 3 allies and herself. However, I will mention that the negative status effect conditional is really hard to utilize, because this is something you do not have a lot of control over yourself, so its usability is questionable, because you'll need 4 negative status effects on all the allies you're healing, which is not very feasible. However, if you want to not deal with that kind of hassle, the corrosion is another good alternative. And yes, I actually lied when I said my god days Ishmael's corrosion is one of a kind, because no, this is another one that gives you an option, which I literally just found out as I'm writing the script. So you're basically getting my live reaction to this ego here and now.
자, 테디, 나를 따라해보는 거야. 짜잔!
Anyway, the corrosion at the cost of a higher price basically removes the conditional and replaces it with a conditional that just gives you offense level for the allies if you have negative status effects. Instead, it opts to heal 3 allies for 20% of Rodia's max HP, with it being able to heal 1 more if you fulfill Envy Resonance. A nice thing of this corrosion is that it signifies other allies and will not heal Rodia herself. So if your Rodia is at max HP and think that the healing for herself in its awakening form is kind of a waste, using the corrosion is a good alternative to get maximum bang for your buck. And lastly, she of course applies Curse and is very easy to fuel because she mainly requires Envy. And that being said, both Pursuance Rodion and Hex Nail Rodion are really good healing egos. Even though they occupy the same he ego slot, I think Project Moon did a really good job deciding a trade-off between these 2 egos that goes very underappreciated by the community. They cost almost entirely different sin resources, with one costing largely slot and the other costing largely envy. And one fulfills a great option as quality over quantity healing by healing 2 allies for 30% of Rodia's max HP, whereas the other is focused over quality healing by healing more targets for 15%. But if you are able to play around these conditionals, you can heal even more to the targets and want more. And with one eco wanting to play the conditionals to possibly be better than the other one, and the other one being simple and giving straight up healing, is genuinely very cleverly made by Project Moon. And honestly, I'm kind of torn between the 2. Do not get me wrong, they are both going into S tier for being absolutely amazing. However, the big question is which one is better than the other. And you know what, I'd love to hear your opinions on it in the comments down below, because I think this is a genuinely interesting topic to discuss. And speaking of the comment section down below, if you're enjoying the video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe, because this is the longest video I've made yet, and it will be really nice if you'd all show me some support. So I know that people are interested in this kind of videos and want more of it. So please consider it. Also, another small thing I want to say, that if you like what you've seen so far and want to try out most of these egos mentioned in the video, here is my friend code. I have changed all of my company to include most of the healing egos in the game at up by 3 or above, and with the identities at level 50, so you can have free range over trying out some of them and seeing if you like any of them for yourself. But I will only accept you if you subscribe. Well, that's a joke, because I can't check if you're subscribed. But do so anyways, because if you are unsubscribed, I will unfriend you. I will find it out one way or another. Also, I'll reset my friend list every week or so more people can use these egos. Because obviously 200 will not be enough for the amount of people that will probably watch this video and send me friend requests. Now, you may have at some points noticed that I had Google Translate narrator fill in some of the numbers for me because I said the wrong number in the script. Now, you may probably wonder why, and I will now reveal to you why. It's because of these 2 pieces of shit right here. Before we even talk about these 2, I want to make a bet right here. 90% of the people watching this video did not even know these 2 egos healed in the first place. If you are among those 90% of people, I want you to comment right now that you did not know, because I fucking swear to God most people do not know these 2 heal. And it is because of that I didn't know they actually healed, is why I had to retroactively fix the script with Google Translate narrator, goddammit.
9.
And not only do they heal a pathetically low amount, they are also one of the few cases of ego who only have healing in their corrosion form. I will go over this quickly, because there's genuinely nothing to write home about for the 2 of them. That's also why I'm including them both together. They are ridiculously expensive because they need to rely on corrosion, with the only upside being that home news is almost a mono gluttony field. But aside from that, there is nothing noteworthy here. They both heal based off a damage dealt and have somewhat decent attack rate. And while their healing percentage isn't too bad, the entirety of what holds them back is entirely because of the fact that the healing is locked exclusively behind the corrosion. You could use those ego resources for every other healing ego I've talked about up to this point, and because of that, Effervescent Corrosion twins are going directly to D tier. Anyway, moving on, instead of talking about the next obvious hitter, Sinclair, I want to spend some time talking about the other egos for a bit instead. Those who know my opinions on Lifetime Stew Sinclair are probably seeing why I'm gonna talk about Sinclair last, but just trust me on this, it's better if we save him for later. So instead of that, we'll be looking at Otis's 2 sanity healing ego, Yasunyata and Holiday. Starting with Yasunyata because it's the second to last case of self-sustaining healing egos, and I want to get those kind of egos done over with already. Yasunyata is another ego that's like a lot of illusion, where it's really cheap and easy to spam because it gives its self-sanity back after the attack. However, it has 1 less attack weight, although it does have the benefit of applying lost fragility and 2 attack up to 2 other allies, which does however heavily rely on going quick to make maximum use of it. Overall, there's nothing much to say about this ego other than what has already been said about that of illusion. It's a very spammable ego that is cheap, but this one has less attack weight in exchange for buffs. And so we'll put it right in front of Land of Illusion in C tier. Up next we have an ego that is a little less disappointing, Holiday Otis. Okay, well, I kind of lied. This ego is a little bit disappointing for me, because despite it being rad, it doesn't require any rad resources for some ungodly reason, which would have made the ranking for this ego much higher because wow, its costs are a few contested sin resources. The majority of its costs are contested ego resources, and if one of them was rad, she'll be so much better. But never mind that, what is more important is what she actually does. Holiday Otis can heal 4 sinners for a decent amount of sanity, which actually heals a little less than the sanity other sanity healing egos provide, but is still quite substantial. A benefit it does have is the damage up it can apply to the biggest sin resource resonance in the chain, which is a nice little benefit especially if you're running a resonance team. Oh yeah, also I will be a little bit biased in saying that this passive is pretty good if you're running G-Corp Otis. Gosh, I know, God forbid that the guy who loves G-Corp Otis and thinks he's the top tier unit likes G-Corp Otis. Which, by the way, you should totally watch that video after this video. But yeah, considering how many buff G-Corp Otis applies, she can apply a bunch of random effects to the enemies and make use of it pretty well. But for any other Otis, it's a somewhat disappointing passive. Overall, the little G-Corp bit will not affect my final ranking because, as I said, I will be unbiased for this video. And overall, I think that Holiday Otis, considering it heals less sanity than the other alternatives we talked about, will be going into A tier, because it's not necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily as good as the other alternatives. Anyway, with that being said, we are to the second last sinner we'll be talking about, and we'll be starting with Lantern Greg. Wait a second, this isn't Lantern Gregor. Okay, so you know how I complained about both Camilla egos having healing shoehorned in? Yeah, this guy takes it to a whole new level. Let's be real here. Did you actually even know he had healing? I want to bet not, because most people use Legendary Gregor instead. Do you want to know how he heals? Yes, I'm serious. This is the only healing he has. There are so many things wrong here, I don't even know where to start. The fact I had to spend time on this absolutely useless ego that almost no one uses is one thing, but holy is it actually impressive how bad this ego is at healing. Okay, let me present this hypothetical to you just to showcase how bad it is. Usually when you get to 25% health, we can collectively agree that you're pretty much screwed, right? Like if you reach 25 health, something must have really screwed you over, and it is highly likely that your Gregor is probably staggered in this case. Unless you had some experience where you've had Gregor slowly but surely dwindle on HP, most of the time this is the result of your Gregor getting absolutely gutted by a really strong enemy skill, and he probably is staggered now. So if you are lucky that your Gregor doesn't die immediately, what he gets is a literal joke of a consolation prize. 15 health and 2 protection. Are you kidding? And no, it gets even worse, because not only does Gregor feel the need to absolutely disappoint me with the healing this ego provides, it feels the need to completely on the entire team by applying +2 SP loss efficiency, making them lose more sanity. So in this hypothetical, also called 95% of all cases, is Gregor gets the equivalent of basically a consolation prize, because holy it is impressive to reach 25% health in the first place and not instantly die. He also feels the need to completely screw over everyone else's sanity. Are you serious? What is this passive, Project Moon? This passive is beyond useless. In fact, it literally screws you over. It doesn't even heal a percentage of HP, so this ego is doomed to just become worse and worse over time as levels increase. Generally, like, no, I ask you, have you had this passive ever trigger? Because I want to bet not a single soul has ever gotten use out of this passive. Because it is beyond garbage. Just use Ledger Domain instead. You know how I said that if something is so bad, it will go a rank lower, including below D tier? Well, I'm here to make a case that we should actually fucking apologize to Soda Honglu, because clearly, we were too harsh on him, and ignored the actual ego we should bully instead. Because wow, I want to bet people, no matter how horrible the hitting on Soda Honglu is, people actually got use out of that ego, because it is based on actually usable, even if you have to gamble for it. So it's going to the depths of the tier list, beyond even D tier. He will go to something lower than D tier. He will be casted into the void below, because he literally serves zero purpose. Anyway, to be actually serious for a moment, he's going down to below D tier because his healing just is that unviable to activate. Because you quite literally cannot deny that people have had healing from Soda Honglu be more useful than people have had healing from suddenly one day Gregor be actually useful to them. And if my sinners are going to take sanity damage from this passive activating, I'd rather have Gregor kill himself. Moving on to Lanta Gregor, he is the absolute last self-sustaining ego we will be talking about, but he's probably the best one. Honestly, this one is probably the absolute simplest one to talk about as well. It costs an insanely cheap amount and uses only sin resources that aren't highly contested. And overall it just, well, it straight up heals by down stealth, yep, that's it. It's a release ego that literally has 2 lines of text, what did you expect? It's just a straight up good ego if you need healing for Gregor, unlike some other options. And no, yeah, it fulfills its role very well. Has 3 attack weight as well, and it's almost mono gluttony. So it's highly spammable, especially because slot tends to also be present in most identities that have gluttony. So no, yeah, it's cheap, does its job very well, it's spammable, and honestly, that makes it a solid A tier. Admittedly bottom of A tier, but it's just straight up good at what it does, so yeah. Up next we have Garden of Banban Gre... Did I seriously just say Garden of Banban? Holy shit, I can't fucking believe. Did I actually just say fucking Garden of Banban? Okay. That's going in the script, I don't care. That's going in. Anyway, Garden of Banban Gregor is an ego with quite a history. It is the most expensive ego in the game and costs 2 of every ego resource. So its usability is questionable. This guy will get its own video at some point because I think this ego is genuinely good and I figured out a way to use him reliably in the Sin resource team. However, if I were to cover that right now, this video would genuinely be an hour longer. And so we'll be mostly sticking to talking about the healing. And for its cost, the healing is absolutely amazing. If you are able to afford this ego cost, its healing is absolutely worth it. Because at best it can heal 22% health of 7 allies if a Sin Resonance conditional is fulfilled. Which by the way we'll be ignoring the 7th since we are assuming teams of
6.
But makes for a total of 270 health healed. Which is a frankly ridiculous amount.
선물이라고 할 건 없고.
Like to compare to Fluid Sac, she heals nearly 100 less at 186. Not only that, if you are able to get Resonance and Gregor is going fast, you can get an absolutely insane power up and damage up for the Sin, which is part of the biggest Resonance. Which can even be for this and next turn if it is up to a Resonance of 6. Additionally, it can also hit up to 7 targets if a Sin Resonance condition is fulfilled. And honestly, considering all this, would you really say that Garden of Torch Gregor is that bad? The thing that is holding this ego back is the fact that it costs an absurd amount. And under the right circumstances, it can do an absolutely insane amount of buffing in the healing. Even at its worst and hitting 4 allies for 22% health and giving just 1 damage buff and power up to the corresponding Sin Resonance is still pretty alright. In regular teams, this ego will be pretty difficult to get the maximum potential out of, because most are designed to be Sin Resonance. However, even just having a Resonance of 3, which is pretty easy to fulfill, or even 4 can make it a lot better. Not only that, but its cost won't be as big of an issue. And this is a spoiler for Kanto 70 in case you haven't cleared it, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want to get spoiled. But Kanto 7's Seed of Light ability, Suburbia, can possibly make this ego a lot more viable. Because Suburbia decreases the cost to 0 sin resources. One can obviously make the argument it makes any ego really good because they cost 0 sin resources. However, I think a case can be made for expensive egos that cost over 10 sin resources like Guard of Thorns Gregor. And I think one can especially make a case for Guard of Thorns Gregor because he's the most costly ego. He will get his own video at some point, but I do think that the healing of this ego cannot be understated because it is frankly an insane amount. And so, while the conditionals are difficult to fulfill in a team that isn't revolved around resonance, I gotta say that it is good even if you are able to get a sin resonance of just 3 or 4 off. And with its healing, it is guaranteed to just whisk away all the health problems you have on your team. So, because of the super high amount of healing you can do, just going off of the numbers alone, it will go into S tier. And I don't think its high cost is enough of a reason to bump it down a rank, because it is also counteracted a bit by the high amount of buffs it can apply under the right circumstances, and so my final decision is S tier. For those reasons, as much as I joke around to play things up, I try to not be biased at all and try to be objective when ranking every healing ego. That's why I outlined the way I rank these egos at the beginning of the video. However, I do want to state that this ego has a lot more value than the community makes it out to believe. And also because I want to give him his own dedicated video at one point where I'll talk about how to properly use and feel this ego. Because admittedly, this ego is weird to use because it requires sin resonance, but also because it requires all sin resources. So it is weirdly counterintuitive to itself. But I think under the right circumstances, it has the possibility to be a good ego. If you're at all interested in the analysis of this ego in a future video, subscribe to be notified when a video is going to come out. But with that being said, we're gonna move on to the one sinner I think everyone is afraid of me talking about, Sinclair. Now, before we talk about Sinclair, I think I have to say something important. This video at the end of the day is meant to be a genuinely serious analysis of all healing egos in the game, categorizing them based off of how good they are. This video was 50% made in response to the critique I got on my Lifetime Stew Sinclair video, which some people took a bit more seriously than I intended to. Because that video was made half a joke and half to be serious, and so because people wanted a serious analysis about it, I decided to give people exactly what they wanted. And honestly, a good part of me also made this video to talk about the other healing egos that I think are super underrated and underutilized, and also to, I guess, rectify the sins I committed in my Lifetime Stew Sinclair video. And so with that, I present to you a genuinely serious analysis of Lifetime Stew Sinclair. Lifetime Stew Sinclair is mocked in the community for a pretty good reason, because the way he is designed as an ego just seems wrong in so many ways. I have different opinions, however people often complain that his ego is too luck reliant because it needs to roll heads to heal, and if it rolls tails it applies 7 burn to all allies. Also the fact that it doesn't always heal your allies because its targeting is based on the lowest HP, and thus can sometimes hit enemies more often than it can hit allies. Lastly, it is also criticized for just generally being a weak ego with how low it rolls. However, I want to make the case that it isn't as bad as people make it out to be. Obviously not the best, but definitely not the second worst in the game. So let's talk about the possible healing it can do. Granted you roll heads, it will heal 10% of Sinclair's max HP to the allies it hits. This can be manipulated by purposely using identities with high health. However, at its absolute least, it will heal 16 health per ally if you are literally using LCP Sinclair. However, unless you have no other identities, you must be genuinely lobotomized if you are using LCP Sinclair with this ego. So we will instead look at Don Office Sinclair. Don Office Sinclair and I guess Motor Office Sinclair both have the least HP and will heal 18 HP on hit per ally on head roll, which is 18 health at least and 90 health at best, because it has 7 attack weight and you have 5 other sinners to heal. And 90 health, honestly all things considered, isn't that bad. 90 is not that far off from the healing of some of the egos we've talked about, all things considered. It's definitely the least, however that is if you are using Don Office Sinclair. And honestly, if you're using Don Office Sinclair, you're most likely using it for the passive anyways, because his sanity is very volatile and you'll often roll tails with him. Now, if we are talking about any other Sinclair identity, we can see that they all have over 200 health, and usually around the 200 210 to 230 range. Let's for example take Sinclair because he has a good average HP to use, and besides it's not like you want to use it with the Incorp, because the intention is to heal and not to burn your team alive with 7 burn. With Sinclair, a head's hit on the ally will heal 21 health, making it so it can heal up to 105 health at best, which we'll use as a baseline going forward. Now obviously there's still a big flaw, that is that I can roll tails and damage your allies. To this, I cannot recommend anything other than just hard luck. However, I can suggest to only use this ego at 44 sanity, which you do for most egos anyways. And considering it costs 50 sanity, it will have a 1 in 5 chance to roll tails, severely minimizing it from the 50-50 chance everyone sees it as. The 7 burn I think honestly isn't that bad for 2 reasons. 1. Because of the precautions you can take to manipulate luck. You can try to always be at 45 sanity to avoid applying 7 burn to allies. Just so long as you use it at 45 sanity, the 7 burn will only happen once every 5 uses. And secondly, much like Soda Honglu's healing, the 7 burn is a static number. This doesn't increase as the healing of Lifetime Stew Sinclair does, as our HP pools get higher and thus heal more, and the 7 burn doesn't increase, and thus is comparatively less than the max HP we have now. Back in the release of the game, 7 burn was a lot because the average HP at level 30 was 150 or something, but nowadays with the average HP being 208, 7 burn hurts a little less because comparatively speaking it is now a smaller part of our HP than it used to be. And thankfully even if you roll tails, your resources aren't wasted as much because it gives ego resource amp, which makes your sinners generate double ego resources for a turn. This can make it very easily generate a bunch of ego resources, but mainly it's used to refund a portion of the cost you spent on the ego, so it's like a consolation prize, but actually good this time. I did mock Soda Ryoshu's Sin resource generation, however, Ryoshu's Sin generation and the fact Soda Honglu need to roll heads or tails to heal only health or sanity, I don't think it is as bad as Lifetime Stew Sinclair because the ego resource amp acts as a fail-safe for when you roll tails. And I'm not trying to say that the gambling on this ego is good, the gambling is bad. However, I think people exaggerate the gambling a bit too much and make it out to be much worse than it actually is. With Soda Honglu it is horrible because you can't freely choose whether you want health or sanity, unless you want to be at minus 45 sanity or 45 sanity constantly, and that is hard to manage. For Lifetime Stew Sinclair, generally you just want to keep him at 45 sanity, because most of the time you want to roll heads and you want to heal. And of course lastly, we have to talk about the fact it can sometimes just not target allies at all. If you are really that unlucky and is exclusively targeting enemies, you will at least have one ally hit by the skill. However, that is extraordinarily rare at best. You can have 2 enemies you can target because you want all the other attack weight to go to your allies, because you have 7 attack weight in total. Now personally, from having used Lifetime Stew Sinclair a lot myself, I've rarely found myself in a situation where I have this eco targeting more than 4 enemies at a time. And this is because generally speaking enemies will have more HP than sinners do. This does come from an argument of just trust me bro, but I am mentioning it because I've probably used this eco more than anyone else in this community. There are of course instances where I've seen Lifetime Stew Sinclair target 5 or 6 enemies at a time, but those are extraordinarily rare. More often than not, there will be 2 to 3 enemies he will target, and the rest of the team receives either healing or sin resources and the haste buff, but more often than not healing of course. And lastly, I want to take some time to generally just mention some actual positives about this eco I can mention without getting lynched for my opinions. Lifetime Stew Sinclair is ridiculously cheap, requiring mostly sin resources that aren't that heavily contested, and just requiring a little bit of lust. And while 105 healing isn't that much, for just such a cheap cost, it is honestly not that bad. If I can recommend anyone how to use Lifetime Stew Sinclair, it will be when you have 45 sanity. Sure, the 2 haste can be ridiculously good in the haste team, but you can have crow's eye view for that. But it's best to just keep using it at 45 sanity if you need healing. And so you want to play this eco like a cycle of using it at 45 sanity, clashing to get sanity back, and using it again if you need healing. This is the way I unironically beat most fights in Kato 7, because yes, I exclusively used Lifetime Stew Sinclair, and it worked really well for me. My aim is to obviously not say he's the absolute best there is, but his price and the amount he heals for is honestly not too bad, and so despite everything, here's my final judgment. When I said I wanted to make this video as objective and unbiased as possible, it was honestly kind of hard to let go of my feelings for this eco, because personally I would put him in S tier. However, I feel like if I do, someone will probably actually kill me and you won't hear from me tomorrow. And no, I am probably not kidding, I've received an actual death threat over my Lifetime Stew Sinclair video, despite trying to make it very obvious it was half-joking. And while some of the critique I've read was written very personally and non-constructive, it's the kind of critique of people wanting an actual serious analysis of this ego that I'm making this video in the first place. Because at the end of the day, I think internalizing critique rather than arguing and crying about it over the internet is a better course of action to take. And it's completely fine to disagree. Heck, I'm willing to hear people's opinions on some of my takes. But in a formal, polite manner with valid points, because I will straight up delete comments that are written like a personal attack rather than valid critique or try to start a discussion. Because at the end of the day, I think having a lighthearted discussion about this ego and their viability is much more healthy than arguing and both sides getting upset. Because all in all, I make these videos just for fun and because I want to rectify my mistakes for the Lifetime Stew Sinclair video. And so with that, I will give my controversial opinion on Lifetime Stew Sinclair. Low A tier. Don't get me wrong here. Personally, I think Impending Day Sinclair, which I want to talk about next, is way better. Especially Later Sinclair. However, I don't think that objectively speaking, this ego can be labeled as the second worst ego in the game, as the community likes to put it. Because looking at S tier, there's no way you can compete with those egos. However, looking at B and C tier, this ego in terms of the things it does, is a better alternative than the others. That is not to say that, for example, Sunshower Yi Sang is outright worse than him. Sunshower Yi Sang would be S tier if this was a damage competition, but looking at some of the other healing options down there, the healing he could do, if we're talking about the numbers, is just more than the others. Yes, it has absolutely glaring flaws, like requiring heads rolls to heal, not always hitting allies, and the fact it applies burn. However, I have, to the absolute best of my abilities, provided ways to mitigate those negatives and explained how they aren't as bad as people make them out to be. And personally, I think that the benefits of it being a very low cost healing ego with sin resources that aren't often fought over by other egos outweighs the negatives it has if you just use it at 45 sanity. Like literally, just see it as a conditional. If you aren't using it at 45 sanity, you will most likely just roll tails. And besides, mostly you're at 45 sanity if you're using egos anyways. And if you watch my Lifetime Stew Sinclair video, you may obviously wonder what is my opinion on him compared to Fluid Sac Faust, right? Well, here's my opinion. Just use both egos. Sure, there's obviously a meta Limbus company, and the meta for healing is obviously Fluid Sac Faust. But what is there to prevent you from using Lifetime Stew Sinclair as well? They don't even compete over that many sin resources in the first place, and secondly, they are both valid egos that heal nearly the entire team. And actually, if you look at the list, you will see a notable lack of team-wide healing for everyone. Of course, that isn't to say Fairy and Impending Day Sinclair don't exist. They are also valid options. However, I think having multiple team-wide healing egos is honestly very valuable. And if anything, Fluid Sac Faust can help Lifetime Stew Sinclair's sanity situation out as well if you think it's that bad. And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is to just have fun in the game. Like, come on, I made this video for fun because a lot of these other healing egos, like Lifetime Stew Sinclair, is just fun and unique to me, and making this video has made me genuinely appreciate some of the other egos like Hex Nail Outis and Eyes Ishmael for being so creatively designed. And so with that, like and subscribe if you enjoy. Nah, just kidding, we're not even done with the video yet. I bet I made you probably feel like we're done with the video, but no, we got 2 more egos to talk about. So now that we're done with that, let's talk about Impending Day Sinclair, who competes over the same ego slot as Lifetime Stew Sinclair. I kinda spoiled my opinion on Impending Day Sinclair a bit earlier when I said it's better than Lifetime Stew Sinclair, despite personally valuing Lifetime Stew so highly. Because objectively, Impending Day can just heal more under the right circumstances. Impending Day is another ego I don't see people talk about often. It is really good. The main thing that makes it so good is its on-kill conditional, which heals as much as Fluid Sac Faust health healing heals. Even though it is an on-kill conditional, this is an absolutely absurd amount of healing for an ego that costs just 5 sin resources. The same as Fluid Sac Faust, but for practically half of its cost and other somewhat tight conditionals. However, if you are able to pull it off, it is absolutely more than worth it. Not only that, it is very spammable. And remember what I said earlier about Rat, Loss and MVP being a very common combo? Well, Rat and Loss are the most common of those combos, and usually if you have one, you have the other. This makes this ego ridiculously spammable and pretty much always available if you have even one identity like that, which most of Sinclair's identities have as well. Overall, this ego is an S tier. Honestly, maybe as good as Fluid Sac Faust just in terms of the sheer healing and cost efficiency. However, I do want to come back to the topic of Lifetime Stew Sinclair. Both of these healing egos serve the same purpose, but in entirely different ways. And in a sense, both of them are pretty restrictive. Lifetime requires you to gamble, and Impending Day requires you to get a kill to heal, which you usually want on demand rather than whenever you can get a kill. However, I do want to make the case for saying that both of these are equally as usable. Lifetime allows for an on-demand heal that comes in smaller packages for everyone, whilst Impending Day requires you to get a kill, which is sometimes difficult to do. Lifetime Stew can for example be better in fights where you're focusing down one big enemy like most boss battles, whereas Impending Day is better in an environment where there are more enemies to kill, and this is completely fine. Both work in completely different environments, and honestly, that is alright. Personally, they both seem equally as valuable to me. However, objectively speaking, I will have to put Impending Day Sinclair on S tier for just the healing numbers alone, on top of all the benefits, and Lifetime Stew Sinclair in A tier for not being that bad. And with that being said, we move on to the absolute last healing ego in the game, that being Lantern Sinclair. Well, unless Project Moon decides to release a healing ego out of nowhere, completely ruined my video plans, but yeah.
나무와 함께.
Lantern Sinclair is also really good. It costs largely gluttony, which is very easy to come by, and in most cases it can heal 90% on max HP if it hits 3 targets. And it has a conditional for being below 50% health to heal 2 more targets, and thus basically healing another 60% of health. Frankly, with the conditional fulfilled, this ego heals an absurd amount of health, 310 to be exact. However, I will have to say that being below 50% health is a pretty difficult conditional to fulfill, unless you're already getting your entire team beaten to death. However, even with that in mind, I think it's very obvious where this ego is going, S rank, even beyond Lifetime Stew and Impending Day. Also, when I said that this would be the last ego, I actually lied, because Project Moon decided to be cool and give me some more homework. This little section is where I want to add anything after your Mircalla done. Because Christmas Nightmare Ishmael Gregor just released, and I don't want to mess up my editing timeline. For now, it's only those two, but if others release before this video is out, I'll add them here. And with that being said, Christmas Nightmare is honestly kind of mediocre, and it's a shame I have to break up this video because of them. Anyway, for Ishmael, I will literally show you these 2 screenshots without elaborating further and immediately proceed to put her into D tier. Like, no, genuinely, I'm sorry, but 10 HP healing is absolutely pathetic. Please just use any other great healing ego instead. She has a lot of great options, just use anything but this one please. As for Christmas Nightmare Gregor, for some ungodly reason his corrosion also has the conditional to give 10 goddamn HP before attack, which is just... why? But overall he is pretty great. You get some sanity for using it, so you'll gain a little more than you lose if you clash with it. And it has healing on the hit that can go up to a maximum of 30%. This is just like Lantern Gregor, but a bit more consistent, because it's not reliant on damage dealt. However, it's far more expensive than Lantern Gregor. And I think with it sort of fitting the same purpose as Lantern Gregor when it comes to healing, I think it's only fair to put it slightly above Lantern Gregor, but still the same rank. Also, midway through script writing, it has become apparent to me that I apparently forgot an ego along the way. And that ego is Hordmatch Flame Rodian. Yes, you'll be fucking surprised, you'll be baffled even to know that she heals, but she apparently does. So, I will wordlessly show you the passive and proceed to show you where I rank it. This ego is beyond fucking dog shit. This ego is beyond anything. I'm only putting it slightly above Suddenly One Day Gregor because it has rat agility and it's somewhat good damaging ego. But other than that, why does this passive exist? Please tell me. Has anyone ever actually gotten any use out of this passive? Like, genuinely tell me. Has this passive ever been relevant? Has this ever led to a life or death situation where you just barely want to fight because of this passive? Please let me know in the comments if anyone has, because I genuinely doubt it. And with that, we have talked about every single healing ego in the game, with honorable mentions going out to Cabinet's Waiting Sinclair for being voted to not be in the video but still being notable because he provides shield healing. Although, now that we've talked about everything there is to talk about, I want to shed some light on why I actually did this, and also the inherently flawed nature of all of these egos. As I said before, the main reason I made this video in the first place was because of critique I got on my Lifetime Stew Sinclair video. I wanted to rectify the honest to god stupid takes I made in that video, while simultaneously providing a super high quality video talking about the new topic. But honestly, the more I got into this video, the less I was driven by wanting to set things right, and more by shining a light on every other healing ego in the game. That is of course not to say that wanting to correct my mistakes isn't important anymore, it still is. But in researching and making this video, I've come to realize something crucial. Every healing ego is flawed. In fact, the entire system is flawed. This is going to be the most objective take I'm going to share in the video, and the thing that a lot of people will take issues with. But honestly, I think a lot of the community will agree with me when I say that Fluid Sac Faust is a boring ego. Like, think about it, all of these egos we've talked about today, every single one of them, from the uniquely designed to the downright horrible, don't even come close to Fluid Sac Faust. When I realized that a lot of heating egos are underrated and shifted the focus of the video, the more I worked on my video, the more I began to think that Fluid Sac Faust is just an ego that is very boringly designed, because it doesn't allow for other competition. Just take a step back and look at the entire list. How many of these even come close to healing the amount of HP Faust does? If you've been paying attention, your only answer should be Impending Day Sinclair, Lantern Sinclair, and Thorns Gregor. And how many of them heal the amount of sanity Fluid Sac Faust can possibly heal? The answer? None of them. Yes, that's right, not a single ego here can outperform Fluid Sac Faust in the amount of sanity they heal for, which is just kind of depressing to think about actually. And now, how many of these egos do you think heal both health and sanity like Fluid Sac Faust does? Only 2 of them. The worst part is, one of the 2 is Soda fucking Honglu, and he rarely heals both at once. I hope this puts a bit more into perspective what I felt like editing this video, because it is kind of sad to know that 90% of what people will take away from this video is spam Fluid Sac Faust and, oh, the other egos are cool I guess. There are so many cool egos in here with awesome designs, yet none of them are given the light of day, simply because of the unfair competition that Fluid Sac Faust provides. The only other ego that people really use to talk about for its healing is Pursuance Meursault, and that's only because he's a release ego and we didn't have much in terms of healing back then. The ego that is most talked about after Pursuance Meursault is Pursuance Meursault, which is probably only because Pursuance Meursault is so popular. Now tell me, why don't people talk about something like Hex Nail Outis, Lantern Sinclair, Yasonyata Heathcliff? The only reason they aren't talked about is because there's no reason to talk about them. Because why should you use anything else when you can simply spam Fluid Sac Faust? If you know anything about me, and I've been on the YouTube side of the Project Moon community for a bit, you will probably see my comments everywhere, and that is for good reason, because I like to keep up with the community. And that's why I know things like this, because I constantly look at what the community is saying and doing. And trust me, I know that the only thing the community talks about when it comes to healing is Fluid Sac Faust and sometimes Pursuance Meursault. So that's why I want you to take one single thing away from this video. If you ever need healing, consider using something other than Fluid Sac Faust. Sure, you can spam Fluid Sac Faust to get out of any situation in the game ever, because let's be real, Limbus Company is a goddamn easy game, but it won't hurt to use something else sometimes, right? So why not spice up your game by just using something else sometimes? I've been doing this since the day I started working on this video, and not gonna lie, I hate to say it, but it makes the game a lot more fun to play this way. And once again, feel free to send me a friend request if any of these egos have caught your eye, because they deserve to be used and talked about. And also, I just feel bad for Project Moon, not gonna lie. They have designed so many unique and cool egos with these amazing effects, but absolutely none of them get talked about because of the mere existence of this horrible creature since the start of the game. Like, ask yourself, how many times have you seen the community be excited over a new ego with insane amount of damage, versus how many times the community has been excited over a new healing ego that can heal a pretty decent amount of health or sanity? I bet you it's probably never, because we already have the perfect life form in the game, and that perfect life form is Fluid Sac Faust. And so that is what I want to teach the community, that there are other great options other than Fluid Sac Faust. And if you at all found this video insightful or helpful, consider liking and subscribing. If these videos do well, I may consider doing more hour-long videos, because this was fun to make, even though this really is just a glorified version of my previous video. But really, tell me in the comments down below if you want more super long videos like this. Anyway, with that being said, this has been Welvader. And please, for the love of God, Project Moon, please nerf Fluid Sac Faust. It is such a boringly strong ego.